Good evening. Good to see each and every one of you here this evening. I want to spend a little bit of time in kind of a little bit of an overview, but also a specific occasion that happened that relates to what happened with the northern kingdom of Israel. As you think about the history of Israel, you think about the promises that were made to Abraham, the things that happened when they were brought out of Egypt, the things that were told to the Israelites, especially in Deuteronomy 28, about God providing for them and blessing them. And then also warnings about what would happen if they did not. I want to look first of all in that chapter in Deuteronomy chapter 28 as God is warning the Israelites about the dangers of them forsaking Him. And the first part of it is these promises that are made, and some amazing promises, and you see them fulfilled in the way that the people were provided this land as was promised to Abraham and his descendants that had multiplied exceedingly even by that time, after their 40 years of wandering, that they would be entering this land that was not their land, and they would be taking it over and have cities that were for them that they had not built, and vineyards that they would grow and that they would harvest that they had not planted, things that they had been provided for that were part of this promise. I want to read some of that first, and then we'll look at the things of the warnings and the reminders of what would happen, and we see that fulfilled in a later time. And I said this is somewhat of an overview, as I'm depending somewhat on you knowing about this as it relates to what had happened with the Israelites and especially the northern kingdom, and we'll focus on one particular event in that regard a little bit later in the lesson. So if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 28, and we're going to start in verse 1. If you're using the Pew Bible, it's on page 140. On page 140. It says, "Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God to observe carefully all His commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, and because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before your face. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your storehouses, in all to which you set your hand, and He will bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to Himself, just as He has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in His ways. Then the Lord your God and then all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will grant you plenty of goods, and in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, in the produce of your ground, in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you His good treasure, the heavens, to give you the rain to your land in the season, and to bless all the work of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not be beneath, if you heed the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day, and are careful to observe them, so you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right or to the left, to go after other gods to serve them." And I just want you to think about if you were the Israelites, especially if you were the Israelites in that day that had seen things like the parting of the Red Sea, or the things that were in the plagues that had happened in Egypt, or the way that God had provided them water in the desert, and the way God provided them the manna on the ground, and the quail that were there, and so many things that were just obviously, and not just maybe, they were for provision of God. These are things that were coming directly from God. So you know that these are real, and that God is then making this promise to you. He's telling you, I'm going to bless you in every way. Look at that list. I'm going to bless your family. I'm going to bless your children. I'm going to bless your flocks. I'm going to bless your herds. I'm going to bless your produce. I'm going to protect you. There's nobody can go against you. You're my people. Now, even if the rest of this wasn't stated, I'd like to think that if I heard those words and I'm one of the Israelites, I would say, there is no way I'm going to ever depart from God. I mean, look at who He is and what He's providing us. Just from the blessing standpoint. But He doesn't stop there. In verse 15, He says, but it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all His commandments and His statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the country. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body and the produce of your land, the increase of your cattle, the offspring of your flocks. Cursed shall be you when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will send on you cursing, confusion, rebuke, and all that you set your hand to do, until you are destroyed and until you perish quickly because of the wickedness of your doings in which you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the plague cling to you until He has consumed you from the land from which you are going to possess. The Lord will strike you with consumption, with fever, with inflammation, with severe burning, fever, with the sword, with scorching, with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. And your heavens which are over you shall be bronze, and the earth is under you shall be iron, and the Lord will change the rain of your land to powder and dust. From the heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. You shall become troublesome in all the kingdoms of the earth. Your carcasses shall be for food for all the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and no one shall frighten them away. The Lord will strike you with boils of Egypt, with tumors, with the scab, with the itch, from which you cannot be healed. The Lord will strike you with madness and blindness and confusion of heart. You shall grope at noonday as a blind man gropes in darkness, and you shall not prosper in your ways. You shall be only oppressed and plundered continually, and no one shall save you. So put yourself in the same position. You're the people of Israel. You've just heard there's going to be these wonderful blessings when you continue to trust in God and follow His commandments. And here's the things that happen when you forsake Him. I mean, it's an easy choice, right? It's like, well, this is a no-brainer. This is an easy choice of what we should do. Now, it might be that in times to come, they started saying, well, I don't really think that's going to be true. And maybe as they looked at some of the other nations around them, they began to think, we want to be like them. Well, we know they did. They wanted to have a king like them. They wanted to follow their ways. They eventually took in many of their false gods and such. But I want you to notice, just skip down, and there's a lot in here that we could take time to go through, but he mentions about the way in which there's going to be a matter of them being taken over. Just keep reading there in verse 30. You shall betroth the wife, but another man shall lie with her. You shall build a house, but you shall not dwell in it. You shall plant a vineyard, but shall not gather its grapes. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Your donkey shall be violently taken away from before you, shall not be restored to you. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, and you shall have no one to rescue them. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people. Your eyes shall look and fall with longing for them all day long, and there shall be no strength in your hand. A nation whom you have not known shall eat the fruit of your land, and the produce of your labor shall be only oppressed and crushed continually. You shall be driven mad because of the sight which your eyes see. The Lord will strike you in the knees and on the legs with severe boils, which cannot be healed, and from the sole of your foot to the top of your head. The Lord will bring you and the king whom you set over you to a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone. You shall become an astonishment, a proverb, a byword among all nations whom the Lord will drive you. He describes this description of these others that are taking them over. He talks about them being in a place they don't understand their language. And as we move forward in time, we see that in fact, not only was the northern kingdom taken away, the northern kingdom, which is often referred to as Israel, the southern kingdom, of course, was referred to as Judah after this split took place. But that they were carried off the northern kingdom never to return as a nation and never to return as tribes, though individuals from those might still be around. This was never going to be restored again in the northern kingdom as the Assyrians took them over. The southern kingdom that then was taken over by Babylon with a remnant that came back and returned. And the final time in AD 70, when this nation's final time as a nation, as God's people, was ultimately declared in the destruction that came there, that doesn't exist as a nation anymore. Now, I'm saying that, and I realize that there is a nation that is known as Israel today, but it's a mistake to think of this nation, and I'm not speaking politically about, I'm not going to say that it's not anything about us, whether, things that our nation does toward that nation. I think they need to be viewed as any other nation. They are not the nation that God set in place. Their worth and their value can be based on their merits of their makeup of their country. As far as our nation goes, look at them if they're upholding things that we stand for and things that are right, but not to show a prejudice toward them because they happen to use the name Israel today. They're not the nation of God anymore. The nation of God are the people that follow his Son. That's who the nation of God is. But I want to look particularly at this northern kingdom that came along, because one of the things that it's stated about them is that they had a problem with a continual returning problem of the sins of Jeroboam. And so I want to read a little bit about Jeroboam and what happened with him. And there were two Jeroboams. This is the first Jeroboam. He was the one that was given the kingdom of Israel at the time when it divided. We're going to look in 1 Kings chapter 12. So King Jeroboam is given these 10 tribes. He's not part of the lineage of the kings. He's given this by God. What a blessing. You get to be the king over these tribes that are rebelling against the son of Solomon. The son of Solomon, Rehoboam, remember Rehoboam? He was asked, is he going to be like his father? Is he going to be as hard on them and tax them so heavily and put so many pressures on them and burdens on them? And so he asks the wise men of the day, the old men of the day. He asks the elders of the nation. He says, well, how should I act here? And they say, your father was pretty hard on everybody, and I think you need to back off. Not be so hard on them. Not be so oppressive in regard to their taxation and regard to their use of their children and everything else. And he said, okay. And he went and then he asked his the guy's his own age. He says, what do you think? Oh, you know, you need to just come out and let them know you're not cutting them any slack. I'm using modern vernacular. Don't cut them any slack. Your dad was harder on them. You're going to be harder. And he used particularly this phrase, he chastised you with whips, I'm going to chastise you with scorpions. And he took the advice of the young men. And there was a rebellion, and the people forsook the kingdom of Rehoboam. And God gave then these 10 tribes to Jeroboam. And I just want you to think about what an opportunity it was for Jeroboam. That while these people had broken off, and now you have a split in the nation, you have the southern kingdom and you have the northern kingdom, he had an opportunity to lead those people toward God and toward God's ways. But there's actually something else that happened, and in the way that he responded as it came to his way to try to keep his people allied with him. If you look in 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning in verse 25, it says, Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there. Also he went out from there and built Penuel, and Jeroboam said in his heart. So here's what he's thinking. He says, now the kingdom may return to the house of David if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Now let's just first of all think about what he's thinking himself. He's thinking, I got to keep these people from going back to Rehoboam. Okay, I've got them right now, but if they keep going back to Jerusalem to go to the temple, like God told them to, well, then they're going to be back allied with Rehoboam, and I'm going to be a dead man, and they're going to go, there goes my kingdom. So he starts devising his own plan. And I just want to remind you of this as we read through this description here. The things that he sets in place over the next several verses are repeated over and over and over again as the reason why this nation is carried off into captivity by the Assyrians. It is because of the sins of Jeroboam. Now don't misunderstand that. It's not saying they were being blamed for what Jeroboam did. It was because they continued in the sins of Jeroboam. These things that are mentioned here. And I also want us to see that from the standpoint of that this is serious to God. These things that are mentioned here, we might think, well, that doesn't sound that bad. I think from some people's standpoint, they go, well, it could have been worse. But it is a direct rejection of what God had told them to do. So it says, the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set one up in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship one before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines on the high places and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. Now, he's going to try to convince the people they don't need to go back to Jerusalem. So what he does is he sets up these 2 golden calves. It's like, did he not read what happened with the golden calf? Now, this may seem a little bit strange, but I'm convinced, and I'm not going to take time to give you my whole reasons for thinking this or go through the scriptures that relate to it. But if you go sometime later to the time of Jehu, and Jehu is battling the worship of Baal at the time, and he eradicates Baal worship by, remember he told him he's going to have a big sacrifice for Baal, And they bring him in, they bring all these people in, and he sends his soldiers in. He says, kill every one of them, don't let any one of them. They were the sacrifice, the people were, And it says he eliminated Baal worship. And then it immediately goes on and says, but he did not himself cease from worshiping the golden calf. And that's one of those things that just puzzle me in my head about what is the deal here? And one of the things that I think was in the minds of some of the Israelites, and this may seem bizarre to us, is that this calf, because of maybe from ignorance or from just not really paying attention to it or ignoring the second commandment, that they wanted some kind of an image to worship the real God through, because there's no other God attributed to the golden calf among the Israelites. It's like this is an image they're going to use to worship the true God. And I think as we consider that it wasn't only wrong to worship another God, it's also wrong to worship God through an image. And that includes crosses. And it includes images that people want to present as, well, this is what Jesus looked like, or this is some other way that's going to represent God. God doesn't want any image. Don't make any image, no likeness of man or beast. Remember, over and over again, toward Him. Now, why He picked the golden calf may have been, it might have been that Jeroboam, there's this history. I think our ancestors, they had a golden calf they were worshiping. Remember, that was part of what they kind of brought out of Egypt? And it was like, well, this is part of our heritage. But it is that He's trying to get them to substitute this for going to Jerusalem. So it also gives us a reminder that the kind of worship, when He's making a change in the way they worshiped, this is what becomes the sins of Jeroboam that drives them into captivity. And it begins with that golden calf, with an image that is there. You worship God through this image. But he also goes on and he says that he changed the way they worshiped, but he also changed the where that they worshiped. Because as it related to their need to return to Jerusalem, that was where the temple was. That was where at one time the tabernacle that the temple replaced was. And there were specific things God had told them, this is where I want you to go. I was talking about that with somebody just the other day in a private study, and we kind of were talking about the way in which that God gave some rules that kind of required that they stay right somewhat in the same proximity together, kept them together. And this matter of them having to return to Jerusalem 3 times a year meant they're not going to be getting too far away. Today, if we were still having to do that, if that was still something God wanted His people to do, was to return to the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a year, that would require, in a practical sense, unless you're a really wealthy person, you're going to have to live pretty close by to be able to do that. So it kept them together as a nation. And really, if you think about what the king was trying to do, what Jeroboam was trying to do, he's trying to keep them from being back together. And then he makes another change. It says he made priests, there at the end of verse 31, he made priests from every class of the people who were not of the sons of Levi. Remember, it was so strong of a rule about where the priests came from that Hebrews tells us in Hebrews chapter 7 that Jesus couldn't be a priest under the law of Moses. And the fact that He is our high priest is proof that the law has been changed. But that's how significant it was. It had to be the Levitical priesthood. Not only did they need to be from the tribe of Levi, they need to be of the sons of Aaron, the brother of Jesus, of Moses. And so this lineage had to be in place. But he's now done this by And I want to go back to the phrase that is used in verse 28. It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Let me make it easier for you. And so he changes these things to where he has an ulterior motive of trying to keep them from returning to King Rehoboam, but he's also introduced something that can often happen, and that is that people want to do things that are going to be more convenient rather than what God wants us to do, or more suitable to people instead of what God would have us to do. It mentions he set up the high places, or the shrines on the high places. It's worded in the New King James Version. And then he also changed a particular feast day. Jeroboam ordained a feast, this is verse 32, on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So did he at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he had devised of his own heart. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel and offered sacrifices on the altar and burned incense. So when it says he did this, what he devised of his own heart, he's deciding this is the way we're going to do this instead of what was coming from God. These are not things that God was not clear about. He stated very plainly, this is what he expects. This is what he wanted done. This is a direct rebellion, really, against the things of God. Is he saying this? But we look at it, and I think some people look at this and go, it doesn't sound like that big a deal. I mean, people think about, some kind of murder or some cruelty to somebody or something like that. And so they think those are things that are really matter. And yet God is letting us know these sins of Jeroboam, and that's what you'll see that phrase over and over again, the sins of Jeroboam are the reason why they were carried off into captivity. Now, chapter 13, not long after this had taken place, and Jeroboam is taking part in some of these ceremonies that are going on, God sends a prophet, and this prophet is not named for us. He's just called the man of God out of Judah. And behold, a man of God, this is chapter 13, verse 1, behold, a man of God went from Judah to Bethel by the word of the Lord, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense, and he cried out against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a child, Josiah by name, shall be born to the house of David, and on you he shall sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you, and men's bones shall be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign which the Lord has spoken. Surely the altar shall split apart, and the ashes on it shall be poured out. So here's this unnamed prophet sent to make a declaration against God's disapproval of what's going on. I want you to remember again, Jeroboam had a great opportunity to lead people in the right way, but the first thing he did was to turn against the instruction God had given him and the service they're offering to God. So he gets this prophet who has now pronounced this curse upon what's going to happen here, and he gives an amazing prophecy. Long time in the future, when Josiah, one of the best kings of Israel and of the southern kingdom particularly, who brought in reforms to change many of these things. And it was at a time when there were so many things that had not only been corrupted in regard to the northern kingdom, but the southern kingdom as well. You might remember they were, as he's king at 8 years old, but when he starts doing some reforms as he gets in his late teens, and especially when he gets to about age 25, and he starts doing some things like the temple was in disrepair and they're cleaning it up, and they're looking around in there, and some guy finds the law, the book of the law, and he goes running to the palace with it. See, I found the book of the law. And the king's so excited about it, and they start reading it, and the king, as he hears the words of the law, he realized how far they are, and he rips his garments and just is so smitten by how far they were from what God wanted them to be. But he does indeed do exactly this. He digs up the bones of these. He tears down these high places, but he also digs up the bones of the priests that were offering these sacrifices, and he burns them in protest as well, just as what is said here. But King Jeroboam, when he hears this, it says it came to pass, King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God who cried out against the altar at Bethel, that he stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, "Arrest him." And his hand, which he stretched out toward him, withered, so that he couldn't pull it back to himself. And the altar also was split apart, the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. Then the king answered and said to the man of God, "Please entreat the favor of the Lord your God, and pray for me, that my hand may be restored to me." So the man of God entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him, and became as before. Then the king said to the man of God, "Come home with me and refresh yourself. I'll give you a reward." The man of God said to the king, "If you were to give me half your house, I would not go in with you, nor would I eat bread nor drink water in this place. For so was it commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, you shall neither eat bread nor drink water, nor return by the same way you came." So he went another way and did not return by the way he came to Bethel. Now I'm going to just summarize what happens in the next few verses. You're aware of this. The old prophet that's in Bethel. There's a prophet who's come and made this declaration, and he goes to out to meet him. "Hey, I'm a prophet too. Come into my house and eat." "No, God told me not to go back." He said, "Well, I'm a prophet too, and God told me it's okay for you to come and eat and drink in my house." So he does, and while they're sitting there eating, a real prophecy comes to this prophet, because he was lying when he said that, and said, "This man is not going to return home." And in fact, what happened was, remember, a lion attacks him, but he doesn't eat him. He doesn't kill the donkey that he's on. And the old prophet has his body brought back and buried there. I think that old prophet had to have felt horrible for what happened. His life, because of his lie, this man died. But the prophet himself, the unnamed prophet here, made a grave error. He listened to somebody who said he was speaking for God, who was telling him something that contradicted what he knows came from God. And I think that all of these things have great application to us, to realize it does matter when God is telling us what to do, that we listen not only to what he tells us to do, but how he tells us to do it. And not to ignore what God is saying, no matter who comes along and tells us something different. Also, the lesson from the problem that Jeroboam had, where he was looking at trying to make people more happy with what he was doing, rather than focusing on making God happy with what he's doing. And I think that's some lessons that we need to learn overall from what the Bible is teaching us about what happened with the people, as well as what happened with this prophet. So we're going to have a song of invitation. Oh, why not tonight? I told Tom I was glad he was not leading that in the morning service. I've actually had somebody do that. So you have a really nice invitation you're offering and trying to encourage somebody. You don't know if you have any more time, and this is your opportunity. Oh, why not tonight? But it is tonight. And so this song actually is a great song about making use of this opportunity while we have it. And maybe you're here and you need to respond to the invitation and correcting some things in your life if you're a Christian, and you need to make some changes and you need some prayers and help in doing that. We invite you to make use of this opportunity. If you're one who's not obeyed the gospel, that you can do that as well. we encourage you to do so as we stand and as we sing.